Yeah, now it's in full screen mode. So the topic for my talk today is future cement solutions for tropical climatic conditions. I'll first talk about what are the challenges for construction in the tropics, and then I'll focus specifically on supplementary materials that we intend to use to demonstrate how we can actually utilize effectively the available quantities of materials to produce sustainable concrete. And then I'll summarize with some important key points that we should, because much of the problems are quite similar in India as we have in Africa. So what are the challenges of construction in the tropics? First and foremost, of course, we are doing construction in very difficult conditions. Most of our countries have high heat and humidity. It pushes up the problems of concreting and also the rate of chemical deterioration. So first of all, we have problems during the concreting process itself, giving us challenges to actually produce good durable structures. In the second instance, if we have an aggressive environment, the rates of deterioration also increase because of this heat and humidity. We also have a long coastline to deal with, and as a result, we have chloride-related issues that dominate the behavior of structures exposed to different service environments. So, in terms of materials, there is generally a reluctance to move to blended cementitious systems. I mean, we've been doing seminars all across the country for the last 20 years or so. I have not really seen the same kind of change in mindset that should come in people after hearing so many people talk about the benefits of blended cements. I believe it's quite similar elsewhere in the world also. We should not just talk about Africa and India in this case, but I think in a lot of countries in the world, there is reluctance to move to blended cementitious systems. There is a major problem with the specifications that people use for construction projects, which are outdated. And these are primarily outdated because they don't take into account the advances that have happened in construction materials over the years. There are quality and consistency issues with site materials, most definitely, because we don't always have success in actually giving very large quantities of consistently good construction products at all job sites. And one of the major issues is that nobody really pays attention to concrete design. If you go to any major construction project, the time they take for design and time they take for construction, you have very little of the time actually spent on looking at the concrete mixture to be used, what kind of problems can be envisaged, and how to solve these problems in the real life project. Unfortunately, it turns out that more than 90% of the site-related problems are because of concrete itself. So if you don't spend a long enough time to look at the concrete and design it appropriately for a given situation, you're most likely to land up in problems. So as far as construction technology is concerned, I talk about India, but I'm quite sure this is quite similar in Africa. We have a major lack of skilled workers. And we always have this feeling that concrete is an easy material to work with. We leave it to the last line of defense, that is the last laborer who's actually putting this together to decide the fate of our concrete. What's the point of putting together a cover of 75 millimeters in an extreme environment, and then actually you're getting only 7.5 millimeters of the site because people have not really paid attention to it, right? So there are major problems with respect to understanding or giving respect to concrete as a construction material on the job site. One of the other problems is water addition on the site is rampant. It happens all over the place. Even in very high profile construction projects, I've seen instances of poor cube strengths coming out primarily because the water was added to the concrete. Quality checks on sites are quite infrequent. Most often the quality checks are left to foremen and people who don't really understand the aspect of how concrete should be done and how concrete should be cured. There is over-reliance on plain cement. All over India, that's a primary problem that we have. We can't change the mindset of people to move away from plain cement. The other thing is people are overly relying on the strength of the concrete. They don't think about anything else but strength. So as a result, as long as the cube strengths, or in some other cases in other countries, probably cylinder strengths are fine, they don't really think about what's actually there in the structure. It's only when there is problems with the lab controlled or rather lab cured concrete specimens that people start thinking, oh, something may have happened to the concrete structure, right? And planning of concrete mixing and placing is simply not adequate in many jobs. There are special demands of concrete these days. We want concrete to be workable for many hours altogether. And then we have to place it in extenuating circumstances. We need to pump concrete over long distances. All of this needs to be carefully planned and executed. And if you're not ready for this on the site, there are obviously going to be tons of problems related to concreting. So what are the new challenges? Of course, when you deal with construction projects that are happening in India, and I'm sure the same situation holds good in Africa also, we have entry of international players. So many of our projects are joint ventures with Indian companies getting their hands together with foreign partners. So there's an influx of new specifications, and one needs to start understanding what requirements of concrete are to match the specifications that deal with these construction projects. There are obviously problems of escalating costs of construction, especially in today's world. Things are going haywire with respect to project scheduling and budgeting and all that. Availability of labor is a big challenge because migrant labor is quite common in construction. We have one construction project where in the first month you have one set of laborers and very soon they all leave, and then you have to start training laborers afresh. That's a major problem. You don't really get the consistency in the material as well as the quality of the construction because people keep changing all the time. Water is a major problem. Availability of good quality water for construction has been a major issue in India, as I'm sure it has been in Africa, and this will continue to challenge us for a long time to come. And in the future, of course, we'll also deal with lack of availability of good quality aggregate for concrete construction. And finally, of course, we may start running out of our options as far as cementing materials are concerned. Now, what about these cementing materials? I mean, where do you think we will be in terms of how we can move forward and reduce the usage of plain Portland cement? And how can we start looking at alternatives to plain Portland cement? Of course, this is a topic which is not new. People have worked on this for years and years. But I'm going to put some light on it from the perspective of what we have been doing in IIT Madras. And it's something that has been happening globally also. So I'll talk first about limestone itself as an additive. Then I'll talk specifically about limestone calcined clay cement, LC3 as it is called elsewhere. And finally, agricultural ashes, which Kolobole also talked briefly about in his presentation previously. So again, this is a picture that must be familiar to many of you who have been to Professor Karen Scrivener's talks, if you look globally, worldwide, there are limitations with respect to certain types of materials that we can consider as supplementary materials. Like fly ashes, good quality is very limited. Slags are also limited. As you rightly said, in Africa, both of these are matters of concern. Natural pozzolana is available all across the world, but we don't have a means of actually estimating the quantities that are actually available. Silica fume, burnt shale, rice cash, these are all very small quantities and not really something that we can think about for a larger scale application. Calcined clays could present a good option, but once again, we don't have a good estimate of where the calcined clays or where the clays suitable to make calcined clays based additives are easily available. Of course, for cement, we rely a lot on limestone, and much of this limestone is not really accessible in terms of mining it for production of cement. A lot of the cement, the limestone that gets used for the production of cement is only about a tenth of what is actually available in terms of global resources. But nearly 80% of this limestone is not accessible because it happens to be inside forest lands. Even the ones which cement companies can mine for produces different mixed variety of limestone products. Only certain limestones in these mines are actually suitable directly for cement manufacture. And because of that, there's still a lot of wastage in cement industries, which can be looked at as an interesting option by looking at finely ground limestone as an additive. Of course, limestone happens to be a global solution because all across the world, people are producing cement. And to produce cement, you have limestone availability as one of the major factors. And if limestone is available, there's a good chance that some of it could be utilized in the ground form as an additive to the cement itself. And indeed, most of our ordinary Portland cements, plain cements as we call them, still have nearly about 5% of limestone as an additive in a common formulation all across the world. Right? 6 to 20% is permitted in Portland limestone cement blends wherever the standard is applicable. In India, for example, we don't really have a standard yet in Portland limestone cement. In some other instances, especially with respect to research, people looked at the use of limestone in combination with other supplementary cementing materials, which presents a very unique advantage, and that's what I'll focus on for LC3. There is also a possibility of using limestone itself in much higher additions, even up to 50%, but you can expect a significant reduction in performance because a lot of this limestone simply sits there as a filler, does not contribute much to reactivity. But it may be suitable for low-grade concretes. Why do we need to have very high-grade cement to produce blocks, concrete blocks, for instance? We can produce it entirely with very high levels of replacement of limestone. Strength is never a problem. We can easily achieve the strength of these blocks. So if you look at limestone and binary systems, that's what I was talking about. As I said, in normal cement, it is already used up to 5%, but it's also used in Portland limestone cement blends wherever we have the possibilities as per the standards. The finely ground limestone, chemistry-wise, accelerates the hydration of your C3S or rhyolite phase, and the carbonate that is contributed from the limestone has a chance to react to some extent with the aluminates that get that are given from the cementitious systems to produce carboaluminate-based phases. Now, the interesting part is only a part of this carbonate can actually react because limestone itself, very little of it actually dissolves in the solution to start reaction. And as a result of which, most of the limestone that you add in cement remains as a filler. It needs a good source of reactive alumina to really utilize or harness its potential. And that's where this limestone calcined clay becomes a highly advantageous proposition. Now, if you go for more than 20% replacement, you do have an opportunity to use much higher levels, up to 50%, as I said, in low-grade concretes without any problems of compromising the strength or long-term performance. Now, as far as the ternary blended system is concerned, that's where we believe limestone can have a major impact when it reacts with the available reactive aluminate from a secondary supplementary cementing material in a cementitious environment. That's when it leads to a very good synergy in a ternary blend and leads to the production of these hydrated phases that are stable and can lead to a large effect on the strength and durability of the concrete. Now, if you look at normal cementitious phases, they are typically higher density phases. But when you start replacing cement with alternative materials like limestone plus calcined clay together, you start producing other phases which are lower in density, as you can see from these green phases here. When you start producing phases that are lower in density, you start occupying more volume in the system. And when you occupy more volume, obviously you're causing a reduction in the pores that are present in the system. So as you reduce the pores, your strength is going to go up and your durability also will go up because many of these pores will start getting disconnected. Okay, so if you look at the chemistry effects, this is a popular chart that you see in most textbooks. This is from Young et al. So as far as the effect of limestone and supplementary material like calcined clay or even fly ash is concerned, what it does is it stabilizes the early form. Produces these additional phases called monocarbonate and hemicarbonate, which start occupying the available pore spaces. You lead to an overall reduction in calcium hydroxide to produce additional CSH, or in these cases, we call it as calcium aluminosilicate hydrate because we are using a pozzolanic material in addition to limestone. So in overall, the porosity reduces and the strength and durability are expected to increase. So I'm just going to present some results from studies here. There are papers which describe these in more detail. So I'll talk quite quickly so that I can go to the second part of my presentation much faster. So if you look at compressive strength development as compared to fly ash, 30% fly ash replaced cement and concrete as well as ordinary Portland cement and concrete, there is not much difference in the strength performance. So you can actually produce good quality concrete with LC3, which is comparable to the best quality in ordinary Portland cement. And it is better than fly ash with respect to its early age strength development. In the long term, there is not much difference in the strength performance. The durability is where you can actually see the benefits significantly. So on the left, you have the chloride penetrability measured as per the ASTM tests. I know that a lot of people like that test and a lot of people don't like the test, but nevertheless, it is here for people to look at. So you can see the ordinary Portland cement related concretes are all in this moderate to high permeability range, or rather moderate permeability range. Your fly ash concretes, depending upon the extent of curing, can go into the very low permeability ranges also. But in terms of the LC3, even at 28 days of curing, you are at negligible levels of permeability. If you look at the NOT test, which looks at the non-steady state migration coefficient, you can see that the LC3 produces the lowest possible non-steady state migration coefficient, which we are accustomed to seeing with silica fume mixes for high performance concrete. That's the kind of level you are actually pushing down your migration coefficient to. In terms of bulk diffusion, again, the result is quite favorable. You see the amount of chlorides penetrating OPC related concrete. This is red indicates fly ash concrete and green is LC3 concrete. So you can see that there's a distinct reduction in chloride penetration characteristics also. Now, if you look at how concrete behaves in the field, you have to actually cast and cure it in real conditions. So here we actually did slabs with LC3 and cured them outside in open atmosphere. Only 7 days of normal curing was done. This was followed by open curing. And then at 28 days, we extracted cores to determine the durability properties and compare it to the lab cured specimens, which were cured at 100% humidity. So you can see for LC3, the field and lab specimens are not all that different. You can see that RCPT, not build, not test, and oxygen permeability, all these are producing results of almost the same numbers. Whereas if you consider fly ash based concrete, which was from a parallel study, not the same study, you can see that the field specimens depend a lot on the fact that you have not cured it well enough as compared to the lab specimens. So you can clearly see the difference in the case of fly ash based concrete. So in other words, LC3 based systems are probably less susceptible to the problems of lack of curing on the field. There are several publications that we have on LC3 from IIT Madras, and of course, globally, if you look at the publications that have come out in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a tremendous abundance of publications in this field. The other material I'll talk about, which is quite interesting from a local perspective, not a global perspective, is sugarcane bagasse ash. So, of course, we know that the bagasse is where the fibers that remain behind when you actually extract the juice from the sugarcane. And when you actually burn this, you get this ash. Okay, so that's called the sugarcane bagasse ash. A lot of the research around the world in SCBA started off in Brazil, but in India also now we have a good bit of publications that deal with sugarcane bagasse ash. So why do we need, what is the importance of using this material? As you can see, India is the second largest producer of sugarcane, right? And then because of this, of course, you also have the aspect of dealing with the bagasse ash, since all of this bagasse in all sugarcane plants is actually burnt. Why is it burnt? Because it has a good calorific value and they can use the heat for other purposes and also for electricity generation these days. So we have nearly 67,000 tons per day of bagasse ash that is simply dumped. And much of this is in states which are in the southern part of the country and also Uttar Pradesh and Punjab in the north part of the country. So you have local availability of this material, and in many instances it works out quite favorable to the use of fly ash for the production of blended cement. But then we need to be convinced about its properties. So we actually undertook a large research investigation and looked at physical, chemical, and metallurgical characteristics. As you can see, it does have a very high amount of silica. And if you look at the X-ray diffraction pattern, a lot of the silica seems to be in the amorphous state, which indicates that it could possess a good reactivity. The problem here is, of course, it's got a loss in ignition that is extremely high. So can we use it directly? The answer is no. If you want to use it as a cementitious material, you need to process it. So if you really look at the microstructure, you can see all kinds of stuff in this bagasse ash. What we want are these irregular shaped silica particles. But we also have these prismatic particles of silica, presumably those which are crystalline. And we also have these fibrous particles which are of the remnant carbon from the bagasse that has remained behind. So we need to develop a technique that can effectively get rid of this carbon and maximize the amount of silica that we have. So we looked at the composition here. So you could see that there are coarse fibrous particles and fine fibrous particles that are impurities in this otherwise very nicely fine burnt siliceous material. So what we did was we undertook a large scale of processing studies, either grinding it or heating it or sieving it and then grinding it, and a combination of these several studies. And what we found was the best pozzolanic activity was achieved by the material that was sieved through 300 micron sieve that removed effectively most of the carbon bearing materials and then ground to a fineness of cement. So it's almost like you're just taking this bagasse ash, collecting it from the site, drying it, of course, to get rid of the moisture, sieving it through a 300 micron sieve, and then putting it in the ball mill where the cement clinker is being ground. So you grind it at the same size as the cement, and you end up in actually a pozzolanic activity that is more than 100%, even at 7 days. That indicates you have a highly reactive material once you get rid of the carbon. So here, this is again the process that we talked about, removal of the particles, fibrous particles, sieved bagasse ash was ground with the cement to produce the processed bagasse ash, and then it was blended in various proportions to make bagasse ash based Portland pozzolan cement. So here we looked at concrete properties for a typical concrete that we have been doing the design for. We did curing for 28 and 56 days, and we did several different durability tests. I'll talk quickly about the results. The compressive strengths, of course, you can see are not much different irrespective of the degree of replacement of the bagasse ash. So more or less you have, so more or less you have consistent performance. We did several different durability tests, chloride related, water related, and gas related. And you can see some specimens that I prepared. Somebody had talked previously about the color of the concrete. So here you can look at the color of concrete with bagasse ash. It's very looking very dark. And interestingly, if in the south of India, people believe that if you have a darker concrete, it implies there's more cement in it. So there's one advantage for you. But I've heard that the same situation in Europe could be quite different, where they say that the concrete surfaces have to be as white as possible, but it's quite different. The perspectives differ in different parts of the world. So you need to play for the advantage where you get. Right, so here you can see the results of chloride tests. The RCPT you can see significantly lowered when you have normal replacement levels of bagasse ash. Here, chloride conductivity index with the South African method again produces much better quality of concrete with bagasse rather than with plain Portland cement. Again, oxygen permeability index is enhanced with the use of bagasse ash replacement. And of course, you can also see the air permeability as per the torrent measurement. You can see the permeability index is reduced significantly as compared to plain Portland cement. Resistivity, again, you see an enhancement in resistivity. That means that you'll have a much better performance as far as corrosion is concerned. Water penetration is also significantly reduced when you replace cement with bagasse ash. So all this, of course, is indicative of the fact that you produce a material which is capable of reacting and also capable of functioning as a filler that overall reduces porosity and permeability and results in a much better microstructure of the concrete. So there are several publications we have on bagasse ash. I mean, of course, you'll have a copy of this presentation, I presume, to see which paper you'd like to read and learn further about. So just to round up the new challenges of these new supplementary materials, one major challenge is how to estimate the available amounts. And that's where a lot of effort is actually needed. We need to map these locations. We need to map how much material is available at these locations and how far is it from the point of nearby use, because ultimately everything matters. The transportation really matters. Okay. So next is we need to decide on the processing strategy. Can we actually use the material as such? If not, what is the minimum level of processing we need to do to get to be suitable to use it as a cement replacement? We need to assess the cost and justify it in the overall scheme of the concreting process. We need to establish the performance in different types of concrete. Of course, this is something which has to happen globally for several different kinds of materials. And finally, these have to appear in the standards, because even if you start going to people to start using alternative products, they first look at whether it's there in the standards or not. Even if the standards are not meant to be the guideline specification for the job, people still have a tendency to simply believe whatever standard is giving them and not really go much beyond that. And finally, of course, mass production and use of these SCMs. So just to summarize, of course, binder choices offer a range of solutions for OPC replacement. As I said, these could be global, that means applied all over the world, or local, where you have to be more careful with the kind of material that you have and determine very carefully the proximity to the nearest cement manufacturing unit. We need policies and incentives to promote the use of blended materials. Otherwise, they'll simply not make it anywhere, right? I mean, sugarcane bagasse ash, for instance, unless there's a strong policy that drives that any bagasse ash that is generated at a sugarcane plant has to be utilized up to a certain percentage in cementitious products, nobody's going to use it. Why people will bother changing their already established methods of practice? Processing is often a challenge, and that's something we need to pay a lot of attention to. For that, we need to do a sustainability impact assessment, which has to include environmental and ecological aspects and really bring that to light much better. And of course, impact on concrete has to be locally established before large-scale use of these materials, because what's good in one concrete may not be good in another, and what's good in one area may not work in another area. So we need to be very clear about developing local solutions with all these materials. Right, so thank you all very much. I would welcome you to email me if you have any questions, or of course, I'm here to interact also. There's also a website some of you may find interesting, where I've compiled a lot of my notes from my classes and all that into a knowledge sharing platform. You can definitely look at this on your mobile phones or on your computers. I'm hoping to keep it more dynamic and updated. I'm not really successful at that, but I'll have to spend some time doing it. Thank you all very much. Sorry to have exceeded my time by a few minutes.
No, thank you very much, Manu. I think it's still enough to have a few questions that I caught from the chat. I think we don't have the time to let the speakers ask the questions themselves, but I will try to wrap up those questions that I identified. I might directly refer to your talk. The first one, and maybe afterwards you can also enter the live stream chat. Maybe there will be more questions over there. I think I'll try to wrap it up. So one question was related to possibly already existing specifications, guidelines, regulations related to LC3 cement. The second one, probably in the same context, would be, is anybody taking care of elements such as radon or other hazardous elements which could be incorporated into these binders? And eventually there was a question related to the extraordinarily good comparability between the lab results and the field results of the samples with LC3 and PPC. What is the reason for this very good comparability, which is probably not always the case? Maybe you can elaborate on these three items a bit.
Yeah, so first of all, of course, looking at the available guidelines that are there, which could be used for alternative cements, there are possibilities of actually doing composite cements in the existing Euro norms. However, the kind of blends that we have been talking about have a very high level of clinker replacement. So you will have to need an additional level of standardization effort to really get that through. Of course, in India, we are also in the works with BIS to actually produce a new standard on limestone calcined clay cement itself. And it will appear as an alternative to the composite cement standard that was also recently developed. Sorry, Wolfram, what was the second question? I'm sorry.
The second one was related to hazardous elements that might be included, such as radon.
We've not looked at that specifically, but in terms of hazardous materials in general, concrete has been known to be good to immobilize hazardous materials. And I believe concrete with more tighter microstructure would probably do even better to immobilize these materials more. That's what my guess would be. We've not really looked at it specifically.
And the last one was to the good comparability between lab tests and field tests. Is this a general conclusion that
here, of course, I must say that although I call it a field test, it was a field just outside the lab. So there's a little bit of effort also involved in that field test by the lab people. So they are all well trained in doing concreting. So you can expect that the result would be good. We also, of course, have large scale results from South Africa on the durability index test method that was that were actually practiced in the highway projects. And there also it was seen that the variability of the result and the comparison to the lab was much better for the precast concrete rather than for the concrete which is delivered on site and used on site. So there is obviously that extent of variability that may come in when people actually do this on site. But nevertheless, you can see the differences there that with LC3 based concrete, the advantages were much more as compared to the fly ash based concrete in terms of potential lack of curing on site.
Okay, thank you very much, Manuel. There are quite a lot of more questions in the chat, but maybe in order to keep the time,
I'll try to answer them on chat itself. Sure.
Exactly, you can answer the questions on the chat, and maybe you can also attend the YouTube live stream, because I think there are also quite many questions.